Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, January 10th, and our friend Ray McGovern is back with us. Welcome back, Ray.
Thanks, Nima. Thanks for having me.
And let's get started with CIA, the organization that you know well. And should CIA be abolished?
Well, I think when I get finished telling you about this latest revelation, you may be able to decide that for yourself. As background, I came down to Washington in 1963 after my military service as an Army second lieutenant, infantry and intelligence. And I joined the CIA in April of 1963. So I know some of the players. I met some of the players, and of course, I know now some of the stories of what happened on the operations side of CIA, not the analysis side, with respect to all kinds of experimentation with drugs. Uh, some people died as a reaction to that or as a result of that. And never has it been clearer that it is just this morning, to me at least, by the release of the very well respected National Security Archive of George Washington University, of their success in getting released under Freedom of Information Act auspices a whole slew of documents with chapter and verse and verse and verse about the miscreants whose photographs are prominently displayed, and a detailed rendering of the kind of abuses that it obtained at CIA. Now, let me tell you, because it's an interesting story in itself. I got an email from Paul at RT International, and it said, "Mr. McGovern, we'd really like to interview you about these CIA abuses with LSD and so forth." And I said, "Oh, for God's sake, it's an old story." And here's the link, he says. And I look at it's the National Security Archive. Do they have something new? So I clicked on that. My God, well, I'll be able to explain to you what they were able to get under this Freedom of Information Act. It's incredibly damning. But it's highly ironic that I learned this first from RT. This is not, sort of parenthetically, this is not the first time I got that kind of a scoop about CIA from RT. They called me they called me very early when Vault 7 was released by WikiLeaks, okay? And they said, "My God, have you seen, Mr. McGovern, have you seen this release of all these cyber tools, offensive cyber tools that the CIS has had in Vault 7?" Vault 7. How do we know about that? WikiLeaks. Wow, this was incredible, you know? And I said, "Wait a second now. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. You probably want to interview me, right?" "Yes, we sure do." Well, you don't even open until 10 o'clock. So why you call me? They said, "Look, Eurovision is going to introduce, can you get down to Eurovision by 9 o'clock?" And I said, "Well, yeah. Okay, they're going to do it for us." So I get in the car. I'm driving in the carpool lane, and I call Bill Binney. Bill Binney is the NSA technical director who knows all about this stuff. I said, "Bill, what about these Vault 7 disclosures?" He said, "Right, tell them that it takes enough code that they have to spend billions of dollars on this thing. Just tell them that to give them a scope and scale of what." So I did that. Did anyone ask me for a comment? No, just RT America later that afternoon, and Al Jazeera that same day. That's just a story about how you learn about these things. Now, when I looked at the date of these disclosures, I was still more surprised. When were they released? 2 days before Christmas, December 23. So they were released then. They've been suppressed now. I did a quick look at all the outlets that I would expect to see this story on. New York Times, Washington, give me a break. Nothing. just one, the Daily Caller, which is a very, well, how do you explain? Very right wing little rag. But they had the story, and they have it more recently. So the backstory is the whole thing has been suppressed until now. I think that you're probably the first person that will interview me or anyone else on this. And I just have to get up a little earlier because I didn't get up till 10 today, and that message came in at 9:30. Well, let me say a little bit more about what it contains. As I say, there were drug experiments with LSD. There were all kinds of memos written with complete secrecy. Sometimes the directors of the CIA did not know all about this. And I suspect that not only Admiral Turner under Jimmy Carter, but also John McCone, who replaced Alan Dulles, the totally discredited Alan Dulles, who was not only aware of all this stuff, but was promoting it, who replaced him. Whether they told John McCone or not, I doubt it. Doesn't matter. Here it is, Washington, D.C., December 23, 2024. Today, the National Security Archive celebrate the publication of a new scholarly document collection, many years in the making, on the shocking secret history of CIA's mind control research programs. The new collection is called this. It brings together more than 1,200 essential records of the most infamous and abusive programs in CIA history. That goes through the various code names. You change the code name depending on who the director was. Then you could, oh, we don't have any of that. It's under the old code name. Today's announcement, mind this now. Today's announcement comes 50 years after New York Times investigation by Seymour Hersh. He touched off probes into the CIA and FBI abuses. Excuse me. The new collection also comes 70 years since the U.S. pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly and Company, first developed a process to streamline the manufacture of LSD in late 1954, becoming CIA's chief supplier of the newly discovered psychoactive chemical central to the chemical that is central to many of the agency's behavior control efforts. Highlights, well, the DCI, that is the Director of Central Intelligence, approved plan that would be by Alan Dulles for the establishment of, quote, interrogation teams that would use not only polygraphs, but drugs, hypnotism to attain results in interrogations. Sound familiar? Very similar to the abusive techniques that took place under Bush and Cheney. A 1951 memo capturing the meeting between CIA and foreign intelligence officials about mind control research and their shared interests in the concept of individual mind control. Oh, here's a 1952 entry from the daily calendar of a certain George White, who was a federal narcotics agent who ran a safe house where CIA tested drugs like LSD were performed and other experiments on unwitting Americans. A 56 memo in which the chief, Sidney Gottlieb, signs off on a project that would evaluate the effects of large doses of LSD in normal human volunteers on federal prisoners in Atlanta. Well, we know that Frank Olson, who was a volunteer, worked for the Army and was a high-level senior scientist, either jumped or was pushed out of a window and killed. In New York, I believe it was, as a result of this experimentation, these safe houses. It's chapter and verse here. I won't bore you with any more of the tale, but when you look at this, what are some of the takeaways? None of this was supervised, not only not by Congress, the committees, the oversight committees had not been set up yet, but not even by very high level people of the CIA. These people were given carte blanche, and I mean that in a literal sense. They were given full writ to do whatever they wanted, not to report back, and even the funding of these things were camouflaged by being apportioned to other things, and no records of the actual funding made on these particular experiments were kept. So that's it. Secrecy, yeah. A lot of this, most of it didn't come out during the church committee hearings, which were designed to look into abuses by the CIA and by the FBI. Most of those were still hidden, even though the church committee did a really good job. And the other thing that was missing, of course, was any congressional approval of this. What was his name? Russell of Georgia, Senator Russell. He was real close to these muckety mucks in the CIA, Alan Dulles and the others, and they'd whisper things to him. Oh, that sounds interesting. That was congressional oversight. Now, to his credit, Frank Church and it was a bipartisan commission. They put down some guidelines, and their biggest achievement really was to create congressional oversight committees in the House and in the Senate. The special committee, the Special House Committee, the Special Permanent House Committee on Intelligence of both houses, okay? And they worked for a while. They exercised oversight. But over the last 5 or 10 years, exercising this kind of oversight. I mean, hello, oversight? Yeah, they chose not to oversee all manner of things. I doubt whether too many, well, I suppose some do now. They had this little ruse where they don't have to even brief the whole committees now. They could just brief the group of 6 or the group of 4, Senate and House leadership. So all I'm saying is that we're back to lack of oversight on the part of the Congress, total embarrassment that this kind of thing happened. If someone gets to read this or to hear it on programs other than yours and on papers other than the Daily Caller, for God's sake. Now, December 23rd, what is today? January 10th. You do the math. I'm lousy at math, Nima, as you know. Do the math. This has been suppressed until now. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the agency and the FBI, in my opinion, have run amok, and they've had no oversight. And so they've been able to do things like blow up the Nord Stream pipeline with incredibly damaging effects to the whole of Western Europe, which we see now in this cold winter when there's no cheap Russian gas, and we see the demanufacturing of Germany, for God's sake, Volkswagen laying off 20,000. Give me a break. These things are consequential, and they're not only approved, but then they're denied. Not only that, Nima, but I have to tell you, I was around in 1963. I came down because of John F. Kennedy, because of what he invited us to do in giving something to our country rather than asking our country to give something to us. It was Camelot. He even made a speech a couple of months, well, actually 1 month after I joined the agency in June 1963, where he set the standard for reaching out to enemies, to the Soviet Union at the time. He said, look, we all breathe the same air. We all want good things for our children. Let's do a little peacenik stuff. He didn't say it that way, of course. But he was also withdrawing troops from Vietnam, and he was assassinated in November of 1973. Now, before I go into what I know about that, I mean, I just say that was the liminal event of the last century. Kennedy and Khrushchev had been at the brink. Each of them, it's very well documented, had said, "Oh my God, what are we capable of doing? Ending the civilized world?" And they stepped back. And when Khrushchev had challenged Kennedy with an existential threat, Kennedy reacted as nuclear superpowers or atom superpowers at the time have to react. This is an existential threat. You've got to pull out this threat, and Khrushchev did. They did it in an artful way by trading some missiles in Turkey, and they removed them quietly months later. But they worked it out. Now here comes Kennedy and Khrushchev in communication with the deep state, looking on all this. What's going on? The president's communicating with this commie, and this is terrible stuff. And then when Kennedy gave his speech, June 10, 1963, his peace speech, Khrushchev ordered that it be printed in Pravda and Izvestia, the whole text. Détente, rapprochement, a clean way of dealing between the two supervisors was possible at that time. And so they killed him. Now, what do I know about that? Well, my favorite book on that, of course, you can see right behind me, JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. It's about 15 years old now. It's got the whole story. We don't need another investigation, for God's sake, all right? We know who did it. It was a combination of the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who were just not going to abide somebody dealing with the enemy, you know. Even parts of the FBI and the Secret Service knew about what was going to happen, okay? So did LBJ know? James Douglas says he can't prove it, but it is demonstrable that LBJ knew something was afoot. Witnessed the fact that he was warned about not going to Chicago where the initial attempt was going to be made and all that business. So it's felt very well documented. Now, how about my personal involvement in all this? Well, as I say, there was an elan, there was an inspiration going around Washington in the spring of 1963. A lot of us came down. It was just not me. It was many people came down because John Kennedy offered some prospect of détente, of working out things with our enemy at that time, the Soviet Union, and we were happy to help him. And I was my portfolio was looking at Soviet foreign policy towards China and how that might be, well, to use a crass word, how it might be exploited to face down the Soviets and make them more agreeable to things like arms control, which worked. Okay, so it was really heady stuff after Kennedy was killed, even. But before he was killed, I was in this training program. We were going to be the muckety mucks. We were going to be the leaders of the agency, right? We were the junior officer trainee, JOTP program, okay? About 100 of us. Only a minority of us going to work in the analysis directorate where I ended up. Most of them going into operations, okay? So we're being treated in October, early October of 1963, at a we called it the farm. It was a unknown place at the time where training could take place of guerrillas and everything and JOTP people. We were treated to a lecture by a 6'2" fellow, lanky guy, and he comes in and he says, "You know, That John Kennedy, a traitor. We were gonna do what we had to do with Fidel Castro, get rid of him. We had this whole thing planned, and then he reneged on his promise to support us with his Army, Navy, and Air Force, which is a bald-faced lie. We know that he didn't renege on it. He warned Allen Dulles beforehand. Look, this is a strange plan, this Bay of Pigs plan. But don't expect me to commit U.S. armed forces to rescue you if you get in trouble. That was an explicit warning by JFK to Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles went ahead anyway, and we know from coffee-stained notes on Allen Dulles's desk after he died that what he said was, when John Kennedy realizes that without direct military support from the armed forces, the enterprise is bound to fail, the enterprise removing Castro, he will have to submit, he will have to commit these forces. So Kennedy knew he was mousetrapped. Anyhow, what happened was Kennedy made it clear that, as he told a neighbor up in Hyannisport, he'd like to break up the CIA and scatter in 1,000 pieces to the winds, right? It took him months to get rid of Allen Dulles as director, and John McCone came in just before I joined the agency, okay? But what's the story here? Here's this Likey lecturer, October 1963. Kennedy is a traitor. He reneged on his promise to support us in this Bay of Pigs nomination. He's a traitor. We never had a president like this before. He's just, and chapter and verse. And I'm thinking, I mean, what, 23 years old, right? I'm thinking, huh? This is odd. I mean, aren't we all working for President Kennedy? I mean, well, apparently that was naivete. We weren't all working for John Kennedy. Some of us were working against him. And I left that lecture. Unfortunately, we couldn't take notes because it was classified, right? So I don't have any notes, but I have a very distinct memory of leaving that lecture saying, my God, if that guy, he was a senior operations officer, if that guy had a chance, he'd probably kill John Kennedy and feel it his national duty to protect us from the commies, okay? Well, I think that may have been E. Howard Hunt. I can't prove it. I've looked at pictures of Hunt, and I can't really say, well, that was the guy. But it was somebody in that department, and I was right. If they had a chance, they would kill him, and they did. And then they covered it up. How did they cover it up? Well, LBJ, in his wisdom, created the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And who did he pick as the senior member to orchestrate the witnesses and everything? Oh, happened to be Allen Dulles. Now, a lot of people, even in that day, said, well, wait a second now, Allen Dulles would be one of the suspects here. I mean, he had lots of reason. Cui bono? Allen Dulles. So why are you doing that? And you know what the answer of the CIA and Allen Dulles was? Conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory. Of course, Allen Dulles knows the most. And of course, Allen Dulles orchestrated the whole thing to come up with cockamamie answers that nobody wanted any trouble, right? And so the Warren Commission came out with absolutely nothing. So that's what you do. You get people like that in place. Now, Allen Dulles did more than that, okay? When President Harry S. Truman, still very much alive, when he saw that John Kennedy was assassinated, he got together with his intelligence advisor, an admiral named Sowers, and he said, look, we need to do something about this. I'm going to write an op-ed. I'm going to check it out with you and make sure I have my facts straight. Uh, but he did write an op-ed, and it appeared in the Washington Post exactly 1 month after John Kennedy was assassinated. Um, the essence of it was, this is not why I created the CIA. This cloak and dagger stuff is really for the birds. I created a CIA to give me the straight story without adulteration, without without fixing it to my preferences on what was going on in the world. I didn't give it the charter to falsify intelligence and lead presidents into making very stupid decisions. Read Bay of Pigs, okay? So let's get the CIA back on track. Let's get them working on substantive intelligence and suppress this cloak and dagger stuff. Truman, who knew chapter and verse. Truman, who was, he was around, actually. He was the big promoter of the CIA back when it was created in 1947, okay? So what happened to that op-ed? Oh, well, we used to have 3 editions of the Washington Post on any given weekday morning, and that appeared in the first edition. There was no website in those days, okay? I know some of you hard to believe, but no, it was not online, all right? And it disappeared from the second and the third edition. Oh, that's interesting. Did it appear anywhere else? No, just in the Independence Record or whatever it was out there in Missouri, okay? But nothing else. No comment, no reprinting. And just to make sure that Allen Dulles protected himself, he wrote a memorandum of conversation to the fellow who is general counsel for the CIA for the first 35 years, okay? His name was Larry Houston. What's that story? It's worth recording here. Allen Dulles made a pretext to go out to Kansas City, Missouri to make a lecture, okay? And then he called up Harry Truman, who was living, of course, there in Missouri, and he said, "Oh, Mr. President, may I stop by and see you? I'm going to be out there making a lecture." And Truman said, "Sure." Yeah. So Allen Dulles goes and talks to Harry Truman, right? Or Truman goes to see Dulles. And as a result of that, there's a memorandum of conversation to the longstanding general counsel of the CIA, Larry Houston. And it says, "I talked with Harry Truman just now, and he completely disavowed what he said in that op-ed that appeared in the Washington Post on the 23rd of December 1963. He says that's just cockamamie stuff. He disavowed it. Please put that in the record." It's an old intelligence trick. Larry Houston puts it in the record, okay? Now, how do I know that didn't happen? Because 2 months later in Look magazine, they asked Harry Truman the same question. He said, "Of course I meant what I said there. It's really important. The CIA has run rogue. We have to rein it in." So here is Allen Dulles trying to cover his tracks. What did he hope? Well, he hoped that Truman would die or this would be overlooked somehow. And then he could always go, "Well, we have a record of my memorandum of conversation with Harry Truman, right?" And so that's the extent to which these guys go. Now, what's it like now? Some of these LSD experiments, some of these, well, what the Gestapo called verschärfte Vernehmung. Verschärfte is sharpened, right? Vernehmung is interrogation technique, okay? So what George Bush ended up calling enhanced, sharpened, too sharp, okay? Enhanced interrogation techniques. They're the first 5 on the Gestapo handbook, for God's sake, right? Now, LSD was not included in those, but just as bad things were, okay? And so when you're not held accountable for these heinous crimes, what do you feel free to do? Well, you feel free to do the same kind of thing. Torture, okay? torture, my country torturing people and bragging about it. Dick Cheney saying, good sir, do it again, okay? And people getting left off the hook for doing that. So, what's the difference between torture and blowing up lifelines for gas supply to Western Europe? Not much. What's the difference between that and encouraging, arming, and supplying genocide? Not much. Okay. So, what I'm have a ray of hope about is that new management is coming in just 10 days. Now, what does that mean? That means that new management knows in a particularly immediate way that the cards are stacked against them. Okay. Trump went through this for 4 years. Okay. The deep state did him in. When they couldn't prevent him from being elected, try as they did, pulling every magic trick out of especially Russiagate and Russian hacking of the DNC, none of which happened. When they couldn't prevent him, related him, in a figurative sense, from doing anything useful in foreign policy, and particularly from his wish to create a more decent relationship with Russia. And as you know, Nima, and getting back to the present day now, just 2 days ago, Trump said, this Ukraine thing is really crazy. I can understand, says Trump. I can understand why Putin would not want NATO in Ukraine right on his border, armed to the teeth. I mean, what was that all about? I was thinking, and I understand lots of other things. I think that the firing of longer range missiles into Russia is foolish. What are they trying to do? Now, this is a new Trump. He doesn't seem to be afraid just yet of seeming to be in Putin's pocket, right? Okay. He's got scores to settle, and he can do that if Kash Patel, his FBI director, succeeds in being confirmed as well as just nominated. But his bigger strategic outlook, for whatever you think of it, includes a decent relationship with Russia. Is he right about Russia being taken seriously when they said, look, this is the brightest of all red lines, Ukraine and NATO? The State Department was told that by Ambassador William Burns on the 1st of February 2008, after Lavrov, the foreign minister, said, Mr. Burns, do you know what "yet" means? And Burns, oh yeah. And he wrote that a very, very decent cable saying, Lavrov says that if we let Ukraine in NATO, there's likely to be a civil war. Russia might feel it necessary to intervene in that war, and it doesn't want to do that. So please realize this. Well, 2 months later, of course, Bush Cheney and Condoleezza Rice prevailed on its West European NATO partners to say in their resolution, Bucharest, 3 April 2008, Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. What does Bill Burns say now? Well, this was totally unprovoked. February 1st, 2008, Lavrov, you're going to provoke us if you do this. February 23rd, 2022, Bill Burns, this is totally unprovoked and it's full scale. Right, 90,000 troops, full scale, right? And it's illegal. I'll leave that one up for the lawyers. There is Article 51 of the UN Charter, which they cite as. So let's just get back to Bill Burns. What kind of guy is he now? Well, we saw he's a cog in the wheel of the system. He's part of the deep state. And it's more heinous in his case because he knows more about foreign policy. He knows more about what works, other than to tell the president, as he did in July of last year, a year and a half ago, Putin has already lost. His military has been disclosed as completely ineffectual. Now, last word about William Burns and what happens to formerly decent people, fairly good diplomat, knew a lot about Russia, even spoke the language, which few ambassadors they do now. Now, what about now? Well, I didn't print it out, but one of the first things he did as director of the CIA was to write a letter saying the CIA cannot possibly release the rest of the documents on the JFK assassination because that would endanger sources and methods, and we can't have that. We need to have that postponed. We respectfully suggest. Okay. Now, that was written to President Biden. Okay. What did President Biden do? He respectfully postponed it. Okay. Last word here. What will Trump do? He tried to do it. He got up one day a couple of years ago and said, when he was president, he said, we're going to release the rest of those records because by congressional act, we are required to. 6 days later, he got up and said, literally, the FBI and the CIA have told me, no, I can't do that. It's still very sensitive. So we're going to revisit it in 6 months. McGovern makes a little note in his calendar. Ask about it in 6 months. Zero, nothing. So that's how corrupt the system is. That's how the deep state has the upper hand here. And the fact that Trump is speaking out so freely and so challengingly suggests to me that he's going to throw down the gauntlet to the deep state. And, I'm not a betting man, so I'm not going to say where the odds are. But I will say they're not with President Trump. Sorry for the long piece together here, but this is really good news, and I hope that people just visit the National Security Archive because, as they say, they've been working on this for years. They've put it all together. You have mugshots. That's what they really are. They should be called mugshots of some of the perps, right? And here it is. This is the first page of the National Security Archive. It just homes in on one memo, about from the Inspector General and the use of LSD. As these documents show, many hospitals, medical facilities, as well as safe houses were used with lots of money paid to these doctors or physicians or whatever, not only in the United States, but up there at McGill University in Canada. So it's very troubling. There was one other thought that I had that I could add here. The church committee did a good job. That was 1975. I know that in particular because my boss was one of members of the National Intelligence Estimate crew out of Yale. He was one of the mucky mucks, and he had great credibility as an analyst before the church committee. My boss was up there most of the time in 1975, and I got to work directly with Bill Colby and George Bush as the National Intelligence Officer acting for Europe. So, that was a heyday for me, and I was able to get briefings as to what he was required to say and what he did say. And what I'm saying here, it's time for another church commission, church committee. Parenthetically, you know what happened to Frank Church? Well, if you don't, look it up. It's time for another one of those things. The only problem is who in Congress would have the guts to initiate such a committee, to do the real work. Among other things, the FBI has had decades to dig up all manner of dirt on every senator and representative. The J. Edgar Hoover era has not ended, and I know that from very recent occupants of seats at the FBI. So I think we need to have hope, but it has to be circumspect because no matter how crashing Kash Patel might be as FBI director, there are very strong entities here that want to stop not only from going to jail, but from having their names besmirched for the rest of history. People like James Comey, people like John Brennan, people like the ones that came before them and did the torture and did the LSD stuff and killed a lot of people, maimed others. All those people have to be protected. And most recent occupant, Bill Burns, has written a memo to protect them at least from the JFK assassination charges. It's a sordid picture, but it's about the most important thing that I've seen over the last couple of months. And again, thanks for letting me tell this story, Nema, and I'm glad to be able to present it to you first.
Ray, here comes the question with the situation in the Middle East, in the West Asia. Israelis, here is an article in the Jerusalem Post. They're talking about that Israel must be prepared for a potential war with Turkey. Do you think that they were so happy, Turkey and Israel together with the United States, they were so happy that Russia and Iran are not in Syria anymore? Russia still is in Syria, but it seems that they're going to leave. It depends on the situation in Syria as the situation is changing day by day. But at the end of the day, when you look at the way that Israelis are talking about, it's not just Iran right now. They feel some sort of threat from Turkey coming to Israel. Where are we heading, in your opinion?
Well, Nema, this is the Jerusalem Post. You have to read it with a very discreet eye. It could be a deflection of interest where the most interest lies, and that is going after Iran, not Turkey. There is a possibility that Turkey and Israel will clash once they Israel from the east, Turkey from the north. Are they going to divvy up Syria? There's potential for clash there. But I think this is mostly smoke and mirrors, partly to deflect attention from what the neocons and Netanyahu really want to do, okay? Way back when the decision was to do Iraq first, so to speak, the expression was among the neocons, real men go to Tehran. Well, that hasn't changed. Why? Well, let's remind our readership or listenership or viewership here that the U.S. faces no threat from Iran. Okay. Who threats? Well, the Israelis perceive that they are threatened by Iran. And as long as they continue their policy of genocide, they're threatened not only by Iran potentially, but by several other countries, not the least of which would be China and Russia, if it comes to that. Okay. So my fear has been that during the next 10 days, the only days we have left, the Israelis go ahead with Blinken, sort of their lawyer saying, yeah, it's okay, go ahead, and strike Iran. And President Biden, there's a Freudian slip, isn't it? President Biden would be obliged to come right to Israel's aid and force the hand of his successor entering office with a live war going on, with most of Congress supportive of it, because they don't want Iran to succeed in threatening Israel. They don't know that this is all made up stuff, So anyhow, that's my concern. And is it, well, there's certain pieces of of evidence that warrants that concern. We know that what's his name, Jacob Jeremiah Sullivan, who goes by Jake Sullivan for obvious reasons, okay, that he's been talking about, well, maybe we ought to do Iran before we leave, and that was rejected, and then now it's up again for discussion. These leaks to the press, and so something's going on. Would Blinken and Sullivan be capable of this? I have to say yes. What are they incapable of? Now, do I think the chances are high? Well, with each day, it'll be 9 days tomorrow, 8 days. I think time is running out for them. But that's what I think. And I think Netanyahu might go ahead on his own, whether before or after the inauguration, to do this kind of thing. Now, he should feel deterred. Iran has hypersonic missiles. They've demonstrated that they can hit Israeli airfields, that they can hit deep inside Israel. The Houthis have missiles of equivalent quality. They can hit inside Israel. Does Iran have a nuclear weapon? No, it doesn't. Okay, but it has something almost as good. So what I'd say on this, Iran, is watch if Jake Sullivan says tomorrow at a press conference, we have found out that Iran is now working on a nuclear weapon. They're enriching uranium to the 90% purity, and they can do that in the next couple of days. We've found that out. Beware, okay? Caveat emptor. Watch out, because they lied before. Netanyahu has lied time and time again with maps and with graphics before the UN. The latest intelligence assessment, okay? This is important. Going back to 2007, when an honest estimate was made on Iran nuclear, they said all agencies unanimously, with high confidence, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and had not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. That was stated as recently as February of last year. That briefing will be conducted again this year. It's the annual threat briefing. So we'll see what they say this year. But it's saving grace. The analysis part of the CIA, its saving grace has been to help prevent a war against Iran planned by Bush and Cheney and Condoleezza Rice on their way out of office, namely, their last 2008, right? That put the national intelligence doesn't put the kibosh on those plans. And in his memoir, Decision Points, George W. Bush admits it. He says, this was a bummer. I didn't agree with this. For it deprived me of the military option. For how could I authorize an armed strike on the facilities of a country where our intelligence agency says they have no nuclear weapons program, end quote. Bummer. So what I'm saying is, watch out. Sullivan, Blinken, and I dare say, if William Burns is told to say this, he might say it. And surveillance is such that whistleblowers within the CIA or elsewhere are unlikely to face the rest of their life in jail by leaking what's happening. Look out for that. And the codicil here is that in those days, I said to myself, look, McGovern, LSD, coups, torture, I mean, should the CIA be abolished? And I said, wait a second now. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Bathwater is all these operations. So the baby is the one that prevented a war in 2008 with Iran, okay? So let's not be rash, McGovern. Let's see if the analysis directorate can hold fast and do that kind of substantive analysis. Well, now I just don't know. We'll see what they say next February, that is next month, in their annual threat briefing. But whether they hold sway any longer with people like Bill Burns or with the incoming CIA director, we'll have to see. But I'm more on the fence now. I guess if you asked me right out, I would say, yeah, the CIA should be abolished in its present form. There should be an analysis intelligence unit set up somewhere so it can be independent and not subservient to state or to defense. And let the operation, if you have to have operations, if you want to have troops and stuff in 70 plus countries abroad, well, put that in the Pentagon where it belongs, for God's sake. If you want dirty tricks, do that in the Pentagon. So it doesn't adulterate, doesn't color or fix the intelligence to suit the policy. So yeah, abolish them both. Start anew, and try to persuade enough Congress people that this is their patriotic duty to make sure that the country and its national security apparatus is set right once again, as it was, I'm proud to say, during John Kennedy and for the few years after that during which I served.
Ray, I don't know if you saw Donald Trump sharing a video of Jeffrey Sachs talking
I
about
did.
Netanyahu being responsible for what has happened in the Middle East, in the West Asia. Let me play it for you. Then I want to know what's your take on
Okay.
and what is the main reason that Donald Trump shared this video.
And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on, these are not even sensible terms.
Your take, Ray.
Well, Jeff Sachs is the best. He's been there. He's been involved in so many things at the highest kind of level, and he knows so many people that the wonder here is that somebody tweeted this out. Now, unless somebody like Melania infiltrated Trump's Truth Social thing, if Trump approved this is very significant. I don't know if he would have, but let's assume he did. Oh my God, here's Sachs telling the truth. Now let's take Iraq. I know a lot about that. I had retired, but I saw my former colleagues bending to the Pentagon. Abe Schultzke, that he mentioned, who did he work for? Rumsfeld and Doug Feith, a Zionist working for Rumsfeld, okay? So my former colleagues at the CIA went along with this weapons of mass destruction myth, even though they knew from Scott Ritter and from the testimony of Saddam Hussein's son-in-law, who was in charge of the nuclear, chemical, biological, and rocket program in Iraq, who said they were all destroyed at his command. Okay. They went along with Dick Cheney and so George Tenet and all those guys. Yeah, sure. Now, the real reason, as Jeff Sachs says, was Netanyahu. It was all the Israelis wanted us to do that. Now, after the invasion, despite everything that we knew about how it was manufactured and phony, as Jeff Sachs says, I was trying to figure. I had to do a lecture up in Anchorage, Alaska, of all places, and I needed to figure out, well, what am I going to say about why this happened? And I think, it's three things, and I coined an acronym. It was WMD, it was permanent military bases, and it was Israel. And I thought of those as pretty much all equally important. We coveted military bases in Iraq. That was clear from public statements. The WMD was doubtful. Some people didn't. Some people believed that, but Israel, I thought, was a factor. So when I testified before Representative John Conyers' committee, when it was learned that the intelligence had been adulterated to fit the policy, that was a document that was released. One of the they're all Democrat people who came to this committee meeting, and one of them says, now, Mr. McGovern, all right, so it wasn't weapons of mass destruction, okay, and they're not going to get the permanent military bases. They even just call it now enduring military bases. But so what was it? Why did we go in? So I said, well, so I thought to myself, I'm on C-SPAN. I'm on CNN. McGovern, you're an intelligence officer. You tell the truth. So I said, the other main factor was Israel, of course. All the Democratic representatives sort of froze. And they were open-mouthed. They didn't know what to say. I said, yeah. If you look at who had free reign into the Pentagon, it was all these Israeli military generals and other, and the whole construct of this argument about weapons of mass destruction came largely from the Israelis. So yeah, it was clear that Israel played a major factor in this. Well, that changed the tone of the whole conversation. And I'm walking out from that meeting to cross the mall to do an interview with a NewsHour, PBS, not PBS, but PBS. And one of the Washington Post reporters trots out with me, and he says, now, Mr. McGovern, why are you so anti-Semitic? I said, what? What are you accusing? I'm not accusing Israel. I'm saying the facts show that Israel was as a weighty factor. I now believe it was the most weighty factor, as Jeff Sachs says, okay? So then I go to NPR and I do my little thing. Well, 2 days later, I get an email from a friend of mine in Dallas who is second in command of the Democratic Party of Texas, okay? And she says, Ray, you won't believe it. Howard Dean is right here. And he's trying to raise some money. And so I said to him, I said, Howard, what do you think about that testimony before the Conyers committee? And he turned on me and said, what? Oh, you mean that guy? That guy from the CIA? Well, yeah, he was former CIA, Ray McGovern. Yeah, that's his name. Ah, he caused me all kinds of problems. I had to interrupt dinner. I had to go back and big people were calling me, big donors, big people. And they were saying, you gotta put out a statement disavowing what McGovern said. And so I spent the next hour, dealing with Foxman and all these other guys. We left this statement that McGovern, that what he said was anti-Semitic. And I told Conyers, you better tell that to the press too. Conyers did. And so he's out. So he tells my friend there in Dallas. So he caused me all kinds of grief. That you say he's a friend of yours? Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. Well, not a friend of mine. Okay. So now, okay, you got the picture? Now, it's not really comic relief, but I know Howard Dean. I watched little Howard Dean as a teenager try to learn how to play golf at a very exclusive club on the dunes of East Hampton, Long Island, right on the ocean there, when I was a caddy in high school and college, trying to earn enough for my tuition, okay? I caddied regularly for his father, okay? His father was a good guy, although part of the elite, of course. So I said to myself, oh, wait a second. Howard Dean, the Maidstone Club, a very exclusive club. And Nima, you're not from New York, but in New York, exclusive means no Jews, okay? At least in those days, okay? So here's Howard Dean, who can't take his Jewish wife to lunch at the Maidstone Club, calling me anti-Semitic. Now, luckily, I have a good little group of friends that advised me on things like this. Oh, I'm gonna get Howard Dean. I said, Ray, for God's sake, this is not about whether you're anti-Semitic or not. It's not about Howard Dean. Don't fall into that trap. So I never told that story until now. I did tell it one another time, I think. But isn't that symptomatic of what pressure these people feel under? I mean, it was visually Israel, yeah, Israel. So let that be known. And if this is an indication that Trump is a smart enough guy to realize that Netanyahu can get him into one peck of trouble, well, that's a hopeful sign, isn't it? Let's see what happens.
Thank you so much, Ray, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
You're most welcome, Nima. Good luck to you.
Thank you.